Unit 3, Jewish Expectations of the Messiah. So based on the covenants of the Old Testament, here's a question that's important to know to get in the framework of mind of the New Testament, especially the Jewish people in the New Testament, because they have no nation anymore. Now the Roman Empire is in charge of everything, but there's still these promises about this deliverer, this Messiah, this rescuer that they've been hanging on to. So based on the covenants that we've looked at, what kind of a Messiah were the Jews expecting? This is really important to know because it frames so much about what happens during the life of Jesus and in the New Testament church as well. So let's look at our covenants for a second. So we've got these four, right? We've looked at this a lot: Abrahamic, Mosaic, Davidic, and the New Covenant. So as we look at these covenants, we know that the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant were about the inception or the creation of the nation and kind of God's contract with that nation. So actually, we don't really need to look at those right now. I want to focus on these two, the Davidic covenant and the New Covenant, because the Davidic covenant promised a kingdom through the line of David that would never end. And so when they were holding on to the promise of the Davidic covenant, what were they expecting? Especially during the time of the Roman Empire, they were expecting political deliverance from Rome. So the Davidic covenant was their promise from God that they were going to be delivered, they were going to be set free, and they assumed it was from Rome because that was the time during the announcement of the Messiah's arrival, and Rome was the dominant force of the world. They were not thinking in spiritual terms. Why would they be, right? So the Davidic covenant, the expectations were of political deliverance, not spiritual deliverance, and you can see why. If we go back to the verses where we kind of learn about this covenant, in 2 Samuel 7, Nathan says to David, "Your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever." In Psalm 2, verse 8, it says, "As of me, I will give you," speaking to the Messiah, "the nations for your inheritance and the ends of the earth for your possession." And even in Daniel, as we looked at the end of part 2, it says, "Then to him was given a dominion and a glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and a kingdom which is one which shall not be destroyed." So they were never thinking in spiritual terms when it came to the Davidic covenant. There was always an expectation of political freedom from some sort of oppressor or surrounding nation. When we look at the New Covenant, remember the New Covenant was kind of the final covenant given to us by Ezekiel and Jeremiah that would replace the Mosaic covenant, and it would bring complete forgiveness between God and people. And so remember, what was part of the New Covenant promise was national and spiritual restoration of Israel. This was never a promise for Gentiles. The Gentiles were never even a mention within the New Covenant. So you have an expectation of the Davidic covenant regarding political deliverance, and you have an expectation of the New Covenant that it was for Israel. But what we're going to see in this New Testament, New Covenant era is a surprise when it comes to each one of these. With the Davidic covenant, what we're going to learn is, yes, there is going to be a king who comes from the line of David and whose kingdom is going to reign forever, but it's not going to be an earthly one. This is an everlasting kingdom that the Davidic covenant promises, but that is not really revealed until later, until the fullness is kind of comes through on that promise. But the same with the New Covenant, right? We know that there was a promise of national restoration for Israel, but nowhere was the expectation that it would be for anybody besides Israel. But what we're going to find out is, yes, indeed, the New Covenant will include Gentiles as well. And so these two were big surprises, that the kingdom was not an earthly kingdom, and that the New Covenant would be expanded to include Gentiles were both part of the expectations and about so much of what happened with the church and with the arrival of Christ as well. So these are going to become really important as we go forward. But what about the Messiah himself, right? We know about the expectations based on the covenants, but let's talk about the person, the Messiah himself. What was he supposed to be like, and what was he supposed to do for Israel? So what we want to do, let's take a look at the Messiah himself. In our next unit, let's do a profile. Let's do a profile of the Messiah, and we're going to do this in two parts. Part 1, we're going to look at the Messiah as a man. What specific requirements were given for this Messiah to fulfill? And then in the unit after that, we're going to look at how he was a unique man, how he was a God man. And so We'll get to that in Unit 5. So in Unit 4, however, join me if you would as we look at the profile of the Messiah, Part 1, a man.